So I came across this story, and it's from halfway around the world, but I think it bears some significance if you live in southern Idaho or even if you're up in the Treasure Valley. And I'm told we have a handful of people in that area who also tune in periodically and listen online. So we're not all alone down here. We've got, I guess, a national audience. I have friends as well who listen in other parts of the country at newsradio1310.com. If you go to the website, you can click on the Listen Live function, and that means you can hear the program without having to strain to hear the signal if you're outside the typical broadcast terrain. This story, though, comes out of the Christian Science Monitor, which is a liberal newspaper. It's only online anymore. They gave up the actual published paper a few years ago and decided to try just being an online publication. But oddly enough, yesterday I saw two stories there that I would describe as being anything but liberal. So I wanted to share at least one of them with you this morning, and it tells you that perhaps they're realizing that some liberals are having their eyes opened up just a wee bit. And the headline is, "Why did it take so long to learn the full extent of German sexual assault?" And I'm going to jump down to paragraph number 2, the writer Jason Thompson. "Even at the time, details seemed to emerge at a snail's pace." Now, do you remember the story about the assaults New Year's Eve on women in German cities by the so-called refugees or migrant workers? These are Muslim men who are wandering, I guess, a lot of these cities at night, just looking for trouble. As police, he said, tried to balance the need for transparency with fears of a backlash against immigrants. Now, is it better to lie to your own people and claim that things aren't so bad in order to protect people who are there doing bad things? Are they really worried that the German people are going to go out and burn down part of town because there are rapists and gropers who happen to live there? I know the Germans have a reputation for doing bad things a couple of times in the last century, but the last time that was over 70 years ago, and they were actually following orders. So they're actually people who will not do anything bad unless leadership tells them to do something bad, at least from a cultural standpoint or historical standpoint might be the better description. The writer says, now it seems as though the numbers eventually made public vastly underestimated the truth in terms of how many women had been assaulted and how many suspects were involved. You know that Angela Merkel, it's a German word for Hillary Clinton, that she had something to do with trying to cover this up. In a leaked police report published Sunday by the German newspaper, I'm not even going to try to up my German. Well, all right, I'll say it's Süddeutsche Zeitung. The total number of victims that night stands at 1,200, with more than half in Cologne and about 400 in Hamburg. More than 2,000 suspects were allegedly involved, but only 120 have so far been identified. So 1,200 women raped or groped. 1,200 in two German cities on one night. On one night. By gangs of Muslim men numbering 2,000. Hello? And they opened their doors and welcomed these people in. Remember that. Of those, a mere 4 men out of the 120 arrested out of the 2,000 believed to have assaulted the women, just 4 have been convicted, though a handful of other trials are underway. It says this rate of conviction is not unique to the assaults of New Year's Eve. And then, of course, it goes through a breakdown on some of the legalese in all of this. My friends, these people are not assimilating. Number 2. This comes from WorldNet Daily. In Lowell, Massachusetts, a 13-year-old girl was twice groped at a public pool last week by a 22-year-old man, freshly imported into the community from Syria as a refugee. The city manager of Lowell told his local newspaper Tuesday that he was not even notified by the U.S. State Department or its resettlement contractor that Syrians were being delivered to his community. And the writer goes on to say that Imad Hasso, 22, of Syria, pleaded not guilty Friday to inappropriately touching the girl at the state-run Raymond Lord Memorial Pool in Lowell, according to the Lowell Sun. Now, last week on this program, I told you that in New Brunswick, which is in Canada, eastern Canada, it's up in the Maritimes, it's just north of Maine, the state of Maine, in New Brunswick, girls as young as 11, 12, and 13 are being propositioned or groped or assaulted by Muslim men who are here either as migrants or as refugees. And by the way, the writer at WorldNet Daily says this marks the second high-profile sexual assault on an American girl in the past month by a refugee. Would you like to know what story he is referencing? On June 2nd, a 5-year-old girl. Oh, you may be familiar with that story. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Yes, Bill, if I'm not mistaken, the mayor of Cologne, Germany, told these women that they better start dressing more modestly, and they accused them of, because of the way they were dressing, they were, creating the problem. And here is the mayor of a German city telling his very own constituents that they are creating the problem. And you say, how the hell does the mayor of a German city become so fearful? Or what is driving his opinions? Okay, one more point, and I'll hang up.
Sure.
In Minnesota, a very high-end neighborhood, $1 million homes, 30 to 40 Somali refugees were harassing a single lady in one of these homes. And, you should probably go on with the story, but we never heard it. And when she called the police, the thing that struck me was it took the police 2 hours to get there, just like it took 2.5 hours here in Twin. I'll hang up. Thank you.
I don't know how long it took in Twin. I mean, obviously the police say it wasn't 2.5 hours, and I've talked to at least one person who was there involved in the investigation. I have to admit, though, I did not ask how long it took to get there. So I can't personally say one way or another if I know the answer to that one. And some of the things, and I mean, obviously, because our tensions are so high about all of this, I had an email yesterday from a fellow who says that the two families who were facing eviction at Fawnbrook are refusing to leave. Now, the problem is I looked at the website and I'm not familiar with the website, so I don't know if I can trust the website or not. And, just because your cousin writes it in Reno doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. But I'm trying my best to sort through all of this, and this is the trouble, is that between the truth and then between what else we're hearing about, it's difficult to sort all this out. I do know one thing. If we didn't continually try to think that we were going to hammer square pegs into round holes when it comes to the blending of cultures, we wouldn't have to be worried about the accuracy or inaccuracy of any of this because we wouldn't be talking about it. It wouldn't be happening if we would just say no. I was also impressed last week when I read, and I had not known that it had gone this far. But Governor Otter was one of those people who told us right here on the air last fall that he wanted a suspension of this program. Right after all of the attacks in Paris and then San Bernardino came along and everything else, he told us it's time to say no. He gets beat up a lot, I know, by fellow Republicans and the like, and he's not, in their view, conservative or libertarian enough. But I did not know this until I actually read it at a legitimate, at least a site I trust last week, that Idaho is no longer involved in the resettlement program. That is, the state government will have nothing to do with it. What's happened is that it's been bypassed. State government has been bypassed, and now individual companies who are making profits are actually doing the resettlement. State government can't come in and tell people where they can live or not live, right? Unless, sometimes you get these sex offenders who get out of jail and, there's difficulty settling them in particular neighborhoods and moving them around. And there's registries and other things that force them out of neighborhoods. But state government can't come and tell me, well, Bill, you're going to have to move to Filer or Buell or Kimberly and you can't live in Twin Falls. I don't think that's going to work. I mean, they'd have to have some sort of, actual fear or have a conviction, at least behind me, that I committed some crime and therefore I shouldn't live in Twin Falls. I don't know that could even be done. But the fact of the matter is that you've got not only the people who are behind these resettlement programs, they're not only circumventing the will of the people, but now they're circumventing the will of the governor of the state in doing this. And at some point, you've got to ask, well, is their profit more important than the will of the people? And the will of the people is a reflection. And I go back to this, that, you got certain members of this council locally, well, one, screaming, oh, KKK, KKK, KKK. Well, that lout should shut up, because people do have legitimate questions. And if that had been his daughter, he would obviously have a different viewpoint on all of this. 917, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 63, and you're up next. You're on the air.
I'd love to know who's paying for all this. They're bringing in these companies to do this, and they're living in Farmbrook. That's subsidized housing. I mean, are we as taxpayers paying for all this? The other thing is it looks like I've heard that they're building a Islamic center on Falls. I don't know if that is or not, or Addison. I don't know if that's true or not. But if these people are poor, who's paying for that?
Well, okay, two answers to that. Number one, they actually ran out of money to finish the construction, at least for a time, of the Islamic Center. So they started building it, and then construction slowed down because, indeed, they ran out of their own money.
Okay, that's fine then.
And number two, at Farmbrook, apparently these people were not there they had not been resettled there. They had been resettled somewhere else, and then later moved on their own to Farmbrook.
Mm-hmm.
So but again, it's subsidized, so they're not making enough money. I looked at Farmbrook when I first moved here and thought, this is nice, and then was told, you make too much money to live here. So apparently they're not making a lot of money, and that's why they were accepted and they moved in there. But they apparently moved there from some other location where they had originally been resettled.
Yeah, I mean, if we bring people in, I mean, they need to pay their own bill. I don't know why we have to bring people in and then subsidize them for everything.
Well, and the other part of that is, I guess they get subsidized. There's a program in place for about 6 months, maybe a year. But then when that subsidy runs out, if they can't get by, then they go down to social services, and we subsidize them in a different manner.
Yeah.
But again, we've all got money just pouring out of our ears and our mouths and our eyes.
Yeah, we'll just loan another $20 trillion in debt and pay for
it. Thank you for the call. Love that line. Coming up on 920, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Look, more of your telephone calls on this subject and some other subjects as well, too, that we'll get to, or I hope we get to in the next 40 minutes of the program. In the meantime, though, enjoy some of these fine messages from some of our fine sponsors right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX. I do remind people that the one thing about radio that we have to emphasize is it is a sound medium. And if you're having difficulty with your hearing and you'd like to continue to listen to the radio, you got to get something done. And at the moment, I'd like to remind you about our friend, Dr. Christine Pickup, Doctor of Audiology. She's located in Rupert at Mount Harrison Audiology, the only locally owned independent hearing healthcare practice in southern Idaho. And she asks if you knew that your hearing health and brain health are connected. At Mount Harrison Audiology, they've been studying the research on cognitive health and hearing. The most recent findings prove that when hearing loss is addressed with hearing aids, the effects of cognitive decline are greatly diminished. Hearing is critical for communication, for connection to others, and for overall well-being. Now is the time to improve your hearing. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology for an appointment. The number 312-0957. 736-0300, the number for reaching our radio program today. Of course, Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and as well online at News Radio 1310, there you go, 1310.com. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, den. Some days, the brain and the mouth, you think that there's more connection, would be more of a connection there, but it doesn't seem to be always the case. This is, sometimes I have to say this is one of those days. But frankly, they're all of those days as far as that goes. We've been just chatting a little bit about refugee resettlement programs, and the fact of the matter is, in Germany, they have been lying to the people because the government and even media, and in Europe, media is just as liberal as it happens to be here, if not more liberal, which is a very dangerous thing because media now works hand in glove when it comes to liberal politicians to help get their message across. And there's no reason any longer for the DNC here in the United States to actually hire its own public relations and communications staff. They already have ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSDNC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. And with all of those people working for them, it's a pretty simple job. I was watching, though, this morning, little television coverage, because the leftists are wringing their hands. Some of the latest polling data shows Donald Trump has actually come out ahead now over Hillary Rotten Clinton in Florida and appears to be in a dead heat with her in Ohio. These are called swing states. It may have something to do with the fact that Hillary Clinton is incredibly dishonest, endangered national security, and then a deal was cut within her party so that she would not have to go to jail for that, as we all saw last week following James Comey's scathing report about her. And then, but I don't think she should be indicted. No, the boss is watching me. I don't think she should be indicted at all. I guess Mr. Obama hadn't left the country yet. If he had, maybe Mr. Comey would have shown some courage. You guy's about 6 feet 10 inches tall. You would think that he'd have more courage than that. He towers over his boss. Although maybe he's never met him, because General Michael Flynn, who's been mentioned as a vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump when he was the director of intelligence, he never had an opportunity. He said he never had a face-to-face sit-down with Barack Hussein Obama. The president never met with him. How can the president make decisions about national and defense issues if he's not meeting with this guy? Hello? 927. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Meanwhile, speaking of Donald Trump, did you hear that the Justice of the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Meinhof, I thought she died about 10 years ago and they were just propping her up and somebody was pulling a string and she was voting that way. Apparently she's still got some life in her. She says she's going to leave the United States if Trump is elected president. All the more reason now for me to vote for Donald Trump. Dr. Jonathan Turley is a professor of constitutional law and a liberal, and he mentioned he voted for Barack Obama twice. But he has now decided that he's actually been voting for a lawless regime. And he was speaking last night on the Kelley File on the Fox News channel about Bader Meinhof's comments and how these do not help the image of the court.
And what she did is not just wrong ethically, it undermines the integrity of the Supreme Court. It's a very serious blow to that court. The Supreme Court has many flaws, but one of its great tenets is this impartiality and this separation from politics. And what Justice Ginsburg did was undermine that tradition.
So what was she doing? Why? I mean, do you think people vote based on what Ruth Bader Ginsburg thinks? Why would she do this?
Well, unfortunately, I think that many of these justices have become enthralled with what I call the age of the celebrity justice. They're increasingly going to audiences. They're enjoying this limelight. And in my view, it's a terrible trend. I preferred the old model where justices spoke entirely through their opinions. But I think you see this sort of corrosive effect on the judgment of justices in this interview. But many of these justices have committed unethical acts in the past. A majority of them have committed acts that would have been serious matters for lower judges, but they consider themselves beyond the rules of ethics in terms of enforceability.
And they also know that their friends, their fellow travelers in mainstream media, are going to back them up on all this. Oh, she said she's going to leave because of Donald Trump. Isn't she wonderful? Oh, we're going to leave too. Well, I hope they all do. We'll start a GoFundMe campaign. If they can't all afford the plane flights out of the country, we'll help them out. Or maybe when we build the wall, we'll send them down to report on the construction on the other side, and then they can't get back over. Yeah, that's the ticket. 9:30, Bill Colley with you. Hey, speaking of Donald Trump, Jeb Bush says he will not be voting for him. I guess that means all of the rest of us as Republicans will have to follow suit, huh? Because if Jeb says it, well, by golly,